Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Teresa Jean Tannenbaum. You can call me Tess. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an assistant professor at UC Irvine in the Department of Informatics, where I run a group called the Transformative Play Lab. I'm also here in my capacity as the SIGCHI VP of Publications and as a member of SIGCHI Cares. And I am the person organizing this fifth in our series of SIGCHI equity talks around gender and understanding gender and sexuality. And I was really sort of excited to put this one together because this is a conversation that is very dear to me right now. I've been putting a lot of time and energy into gender equity within the HCI community, and I'm sort of excited to open up these conversations with everybody. We have assembled a panel of fairly exciting, fairly accomplished, extraordinarily interesting, wonderful people who have been in the trenches working on issues of gender equity from a service standpoint within the community, and also working on scholarship connected to gender representation as it pertains to HCI. It is an extraordinarily large and wide-ranging topic, and I don't expect us to do much more than open up a conversation today. And so we're going to touch on a number of issues. We're going to focus on pain points within the community and issues that we've encountered as scholars, as community members, and as volunteers within the HCI community, seeking to both conduct non-gender related scholarship in a context that isn't always hospitable to people who are not men, and also seeking to look at the role that gender plays within the communities that we study, the phenomena that we're interested in, and our broader interests within the world. And so I'm going to take a step back and pass things over to Neha Kumar, who is also organizing the talk with me, and then we're going to get started.
Thank you, Tess. I've introduced myself a few times on these talks already, so I'll try to keep it short. I'm VP at large. I lead and manage various kind of global equity programs that have to do with giving out money or have to do with building community or different types of projects that the EC has been trying to continue and kickstart over the last year. The Equity Talks is a project that we started, a bunch of us here, the ACs for Equity, ACs for Accessibility, the VPs at large, that's Shawen, and myself, Tess, who's VP Pubs. We all kind of got together to discuss different topics that we'd like to discuss that are kind of touching on equity in different ways. So we've done a few of these. This is session 5. And we're going to have a couple more. So we are going to have a session on understanding race and another one on looking at research and practice. And then a final one, which is more focused on students, that is going to be on the future of SIGCHI. So you're all welcome to join us there. We also have a Discord community that we're trying to build. So please join us there. With that, I will hand it over to Kale, who's been doing an amazing and very inspirational job of moderating all of these sessions. And I've been telling everybody to join us also just to kind of see how we can have these difficult conversations in our community in such a wonderfully moderated fashion. So with that, I'm going to ask Kale to do to kind of tell us how the rest of the hour is going to go. Kale.
Thanks for the handoff, Neha, and for almost making me blush. So I remain your moderator for this series. Kale Passmore, pronouns they, them, he, him, as my gender is fluid, non-binary. I'm speaking to you from Saskatchewan, the still unceded territories of over 70 First Nations people and homeland of the Métis. While we're here today, struggling to correct the inaccurate and oppressive gender roles inherited by our cultures and the cultures around HCI, it feels important to point out how prior to colonization, many First Nations groups understood gender as non-binary, not tied to sexual or romantic orientations, but for many, the roles one fulfills within their community. Many tribes recognized up to 6 or more different genders. And this makes any successful efforts of gender liberation inextricable from decolonization, from feminism, anti-racism, and as we've seen in each of our roundtables so far, gender liberation is inextricable from disability justice and class liberation. So I'm going to very quickly cover the code of conduct in brief. It's available in full at a link that's going to be posted to the chat as soon as possible. And while I do, I'd like you to introduce yourself in the chat, get to know one another. If you're comfortable, provide your pronouns, location, and let's say one of your hobbies. Mine is pottery. Whenever you offer your illustrious wisdom, begin by stating your name, affiliation, and pronouns, if you're comfortable. You can add your pronouns to your username by right-clicking the box containing your face in the Zoom window and selecting rename. As this is a roundtable, anyone is free to offer their experiences, critiques, or solutions at any point in time. This is a collaborative discussion of issues and possibilities around how gender is handled within the SIGCHI context. To let you know, the session will be recorded, and by attending the roundtable within this time, your consent will be ongoing, and that includes any sort of questions, comments posted in the chat, all that sort of stuff. So for the same reasons of privacy and consent, please do not share content from the talk on social media while it's going on. We will post this in full with additional accessibility options afterward. If at this point you'd like to post after the event, use hashtag SIGCHI and hashtag EquityTalk. And if you absolutely must describe or discuss potentially harmful or stressful or sensitive topics, ask yourself why, and then provide a content warning. We do today have we have live cart today, an ASL interpreter and live diagramming. If you require any additional services or accessibility options, please message me, Neha, or any of the other organizers. Yeah, while we're here today, we encourage constructive criticism and critique in this space. Our time together serves to highlight the incredibly complicated interactions between individual experiences and systemic policies. I'd like to remind everyone that, yeah, we're an internationally diverse group of humans. So please be patient. Please show sensitivity to anyone who has the floor. Keep aware of how much time and space you're taking up and that others may need a moment of silence to collect themselves before speaking. Yeah, be critical, but constructively so. Be kind, be supportive. These are complicated interactions between individual experiences and systemic policies. I'd like you to remember that like people's lived experiences are not up for debate. In the event of harassment, or if you feel uncomfortable at any point in time, please directly message the moderator, me, or Neha, or as Tess had mentioned, any of these SIGCHI Cares members that are here. We have a Slido, which is going to be linked in the chat right about now-ish, for posting and upvoting questions as a secondary way to engage. As this event is striving for equitable dialogue and is not a Q&A or panel, we do have to balance comments from speakers, from the comments, and from Slido. So we may miss things at different points in time. Any questions we don't address or can't get around to will be up for discussion in the Equity Talks Discord channel or on the preceding blog post. So with the house kept, whew, that was fast. First, we have about 4 things that we'd like to center this discussion on in whatever it is that we bring up and come back around to. So to name the problem, Tess has brought us in to discuss what would you say are the biggest challenges facing women, trans, non-binary, gender expansive, and queer people in the SIGCHI community today? Another question would be, what do you suggest as a strategy for creating a safer, more inclusive global SIGCHI community for women, trans people, and other marginalized folks due to their gender identity? How can SIGCHI better support queer and trans members who have intersectional and multiply marginalized identities? And where does the responsibility lie for change, and who holds power to create a more gender and queer inclusive SIGCHI community? What actions can and should be taken to improve the situation? I thought to kick us off, Tess has been embarking on an incredibly complicated but so important project over the last little while. And maybe you'd like to speak about that.
Yeah, I can. I could speak about this for many hours at length. I'm going to attempt to truncate it. So many of you know me under my previous name, which shan't be uttered in these hallowed halls. Um, I I'm a transgender woman. I came out and began my transition in July of 2019, at which point I realized that the name that I had been known by within our community was just not going to work for me for any number of personal and professional reasons. And I was fortunate enough to find myself at ACM DIS in San Diego right before I came out, when I was still in the process of weighing the possibility, in a conversation with Elizabeth Churchill about work that she had been doing with the ACM staff and publications board around trying to implement and establish an inclusive name change policy for trans and non-binary authors seeking to correct the published record for their work. And I said, that's interesting. I would like to have some input on that. I'm interested in that. I probably am going to benefit from that at some point. And she said, well, let me introduce you to the group. And she did. And it happened at a moment when the group had been deliberating for about a year and a half, and spinning their tires. And there was a transition in the membership. And I came in right as a number of other folks were leaving, and found myself one of only a handful of trans people in a conversation, and also the most sort of naive and freshest baby trans person in the room, finding myself suddenly tokenized and advocating for trans issues within the ACM leadership around publication rights. And so I did the thing that we're trained to do as scholars, and I educated myself as extremely quickly and as thoroughly as I could. I talked to as many people as I could. I became aware of as many different facets of the issues as I could, because I knew that I was going to be representing a very diverse international population of people who are seeking to change their names for various reasons. And I went to work. And over the course of the next few months, I, along with Ztoops and Kata Spiel, authored what would become the first trans-inclusive name change policy to be adopted by a major publisher in the world. It's an imperfect policy. It was and still is an imperfect policy. And it's a policy that, for those of you who have potentially attempted to take advantage of it, has not been implemented in ways that are either ideal or especially humane. But it was a really important step in setting a precedent that this was a thing that major publishers were willing to do. This was a right that the publishers were going to grant trans people. And in doing so, this allowed me to then create a policy or to start meeting up with other trans folks who are also trying to do this, and begin pushing for broader policies in the academic publishing world. And in the almost 2 years since I started this work, we have successfully changed the global consensus around whether or not trans people are entitled to correct the records in our previously published work, such that as of next week, hopefully, the Committee of Publication Ethics is going to be releasing guidance that we've authored that is based in the policy that we did at ACM, that will trickle out to their more than 12,000 member journals and societies and organizations, and radically change how publishing world talks about and treats identity in general, and gender identity in particular. The reason that I've brought this up here is because, in doing so, not only have I had to engage the ACM with fairly sensitive issues of gender and identity, but I've also had to learn how power works inside of this institution, and how things get done, how activism happens within this institution, and sort of how the ACM thinks about their responsibilities to the membership, their role as advocates for our members occasionally, and sort of how we come to work and operate the levers of power that ultimately control the kinds of equitable treatment we can expect within our professional space. And so it's something that I'm kind of keen to talk about. I'm not going to be airing dirty laundry about sort of behind the scenes struggles that we've had, because this is not the forum for that. But I am sort of interested in talking a little bit, this goes to the third question, actions toward change, where responsibility for change lies, who has the power over change, and how do we as a community of scholarship and as a community of people that are here in pursuit of equitable treatment and equitable policies, find and claim the power within the institutions that ought to be in service to us in order to make certain that they are serving our needs rather than causing us harm.
That's so good, Tess. Thank you. Actually, Susan Dre had a question about does or can the name changes apply to others beside trans folks who have changed their names due to divorce,
Yes.
marriage, whatever.
Yes, and there's two reasons for this. The first is that it's the right thing to do. This is like, everybody is entitled to the name that they wish to be called. Everybody is entitled to be the authority on their identity, as entitled to be called by the names and pronouns that they wish to be called by. I see that as a basic human right. And increasingly our society is coming to reflect that. And this includes changing your name for marriage or divorce, changing your name due to religious conversion, changing your name to escape caste stigma. There's a number of good reasons why many people beyond trans people wish to change their names. But there's another reason why this policy has to be comprehensive and inclusive. And it's that the ACM has absolutely no business gatekeeping who is trans enough to merit a name change. We don't want the ACM to be asking for documentation of somebody's gender identity in order to accord them this particular right. They're neither equipped nor qualified to make this assessment, nor is it in keeping with the dignity of our membership to ask those of us seeking name changes to have to furnish medical documents, legal documents, or any other external proof that we merit this kind of name change. And so from both a practical and a ethical standpoint, this policy is an inclusive policy.
Brilliant. If you have questions about this policy at any point in time, please throw them in the comments or raise your hand. And yeah, maybe we can just open things up to anyone who might like to branch off from that or discuss different issues, complications, potential solutions for better gender inclusivity in specific that they've seen in different contexts that ACM maybe, or SIGCHI specifically, should incorporate.
A small comment here. I'm president of the Greater Boston ACM chapter, and we are in the process right now of rewriting our bylaws. One of the sections of our bylaws defines who's eligible for membership, and we have grabbed some text from ACM's own website about race, religion, parenthood, veteran status, and so forth. One of the lines in there is gender. And I thought at this point in time in our society, we should change that from gender to gender identification. I wonder if anyone has any comment on that or thinks that is the right wording. We are trying to, wordsmithing this sometimes can be tricky. And I don't know if gender identification includes people who define themselves as, what is it now, intersex or non-binary. I honestly, as a lifelong male, I'm not sure I really understand the difference between intersex and non-binary. They sort of mean the same thing to me. I'm prepared to be educated.
If there's anyone that would like to just quickly toss out what they think about that.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead. Sorry, I have a trouble with my Zoom here. I can't see anyone and I can't find where I can raise the hand. So I'm sorry for interrupting by accident. I have some internet issues. I would like just to briefly comment about what I see about this discussion here in the context of Brazil. First of all, it's two very different things, transgender and non-binary people and intersex people. Intersex, I see it more as a rainbow of a lot of aspects that make someone to have like ambiguous gender aspects, let's say. So for example, it can be related to chromosomic ambiguities. It can be related even to more aesthetic aspects, like sexual aspects of the person, while gender identity, and I believe that Professor Teresa and some other people might have more background than me to talk about this, but gender identity is something that is not related necessarily to your sexual or biological composition.
What I'm seeing in the, sorry, do you mind if I just jump in really quickly? Perfect. Yeah, I'm seeing that. Yeah, I'm just going to jump in with the chat before we lose focus here, stating that, yeah, Morgan has suggested that gender is the better term here. Multiple people have sort of offered that this is what they prefer as well. And it might be best to, if we're going to be discussing this, start with someone who is representative of maybe these more marginalized positions. Oliver, you had your hand up for a while here.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is absolutely echoing what Morgan said, and Morgan might have a better take on this as well, but I just wanted to say that I absolutely think gender is the better term. I think for a while there was kind of a notion that it was more politically correct to say, gender identity or identifies as, but really, if someone considers their gender to be something, then we can just believe them that that is what their gender is. And I think that's why just using the term gender is, a lot more inclusive, actually, as long as we take that to mean whatever that person considers their gender to be.
Perfect. Thank you, Oliver.
I wanted to move it out of the realm of some local state's legal identification to a more personal realm. That was my intent. I hope that is understood to be, what's the right word? An amicus brief kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks, Edward.
Also, I've worked in bioinformatics, and I can tell you I have seen the phenotypes of people whose genotype is XXY, and it is really quite surprising. Our understanding, at least in our society, of biology is sorely lacking of the complexities of nature.
Yeah, Kata has posted an excellent resource for those interested. Yeah, as Kata says, for people interested in self-study. Some people present here some people present here have also created these guidelines and included a link. I suggest everyone take a look at that, use that. It's like standard in my lab at this point. And Susan Dre has asked in the comments, why do we need to collect this information?
Well, ACM doesn't collect it, do they? Oh, maybe they do for membership. I've been a member so long, I don't remember what the form looks like.
Would anyone maybe that is representative here like to offer whether or not we should be asking this question, or if we should, in what format it may be best? Oliver has mentioned in chat, I would argue that most of the time in HCI context, we don't really need to worry too much about people's legal gender identification or biological characteristics. Kat has responded with this. Andrew, you had something that you wanted to add here?
So regarding the value of having the data, and I agree. So, about it's who people believe they are, what matters, but it probably does really help to understand who the membership is, because it's difficult to be supportive of people if you don't know who the people are. So very good example of my understanding is in France, for example, there isn't very good, they don't keep track of race because they argue that it's racist to keep track of race. But if race is a factor in, for example, COVID-19 response, then you simply don't have the data that you need to actually help people who need the support. So my guess is that that's the same here, where understanding who the membership is, understanding who the stakeholders are matters.
Great, thank you. Just before I turn things over to Catherine, Morgan's offered another incredible resource here, stating in the comments, Kata and I also have a paper on questioning when/if to use gender on forms. Catherine, would you like to take over for a moment?
Oh yeah, I'll turn on my video. Sorry, I'm in a sweatshirt. Thanks, you all. Yeah, I think this is such an interesting question. I'm really looking forward to reading this paper by Morgan and Kata. I guess just one question would be about maybe the question of when do we need to quantify gender disparities? Because in those cases, it would be helpful to have data to be able to convince dominant structures that they need to change things. So, and then, but I can really see a lot of the points and have, kind of looked at the work of a lot of the folks that are making points around when do we actually need gender data? When is it relevant versus when is it just more information, or potentially in particular in the case of non-binary folks, potentially making people vulnerable to structures or institutions that may target them in some way. So, yeah, I wonder, but I guess I wonder about that question of if we just say, okay, let's be done with it and never collect gender data, we are potentially removing a tool to hold people accountable for the disparities that exist. So, yeah.
Stacy, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm Stacy Brennan from the University of California, Irvine. And I just want to echo what Catherine's saying and Andrew's saying, but I think that we have to make any question of the sort optional. And we also have to recognize that until we make a community in which it's safe to be out about your gender or your disability or any other marginalized status, that we need to recognize that the information we get is going to be inaccurate. And we always need to be pushing our policies and our practices to be inclusive first, so that people can be who they truly are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you both. In the comments, Michael has added, thinking in terms of GDPR, do we need to know people's race, gender, etc.? If not, then we probably should not be collecting that information. Again, in terms of GDPR, what else do we not need to know? Continuing on that theme, we probably don't need to know people's religion. Just as a high level comment, this is a comment from Michael, data collection is entirely the wrong thing for us to be focusing on here. We're in the weeds when there are much bigger issues. We need to be talking about getting people onto committees, giving marginalized people power and making real change, not just how to make it easier for people to collect data on us. Kate Shore has added, regarding collecting legal gender designation, humbly, please don't ask for or require someone to report their legal gender designation. Legal processes for changing one's gender are widely variable and at best are still very biased against people along socioeconomic and class lines. Yes, and Michael, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to say, when I typed that in, I hadn't yet heard what Catherine had to say. And so I now wish to modify what I said a bit. When do we need to know about protected or unprotected classes, so to speak? There are times when it's very important, and I agree with Catherine. We need to be able to hold ourselves to account when it is important. If we're making a list of who shows up for a meeting, I'm less convinced. And I think part of the principles of GDPR are, whenever we carry, I don't remember the proper legal definition in Europe, so I'll use the US one, sensitive personal information. That's a burden. It's a burden for the people who give us that information to hold in trust. It's a burden for us to hold that information in trust. If we don't need it, we shouldn't burden all of those parties. If we do, if it's a matter of power, privilege, access, etc., then yes, of course, we need to think about that. But as I understand Edward's question, it was more sort of to have a list of people. And that's why I think perhaps we don't need to have that information.
Yeah, I'm seeing actually in the comments here, Nick Bidwell has added, it's telling though how these categories are such a poor way of addressing diversity. And has also said, in terms of how data collection relates to power systems. Morgan has helpfully offered here, I think it'd be helpful to move on to issues of shifting power and safety. And Tess has added, I'd like to hear from some of the other panelists about possible pain points and areas.
If I might clarify a possible misunderstanding, we are not collecting that information. We're trying to declare that we do not make any distinction based on that information. That's all.
Would you? Sorry, Tess.
You froze and cut out for a second there, Kale. I was just picking up the slack, but you're back. So please do continue.
Perfect. Michael, Ann, you've had your hand up for a bit here.
Yeah, so kind of getting back to the original question, if we're looking at what the problems are for SIGCHI, it's this. It's what's happening literally right now. There are a bunch of people that are queer, that are trans, that are in the chat being very clear that this is not the issue. And we decided to keep centering the discussion around it because it is what the white men in the audience would like us to talk about right now. The first step in fixing what's wrong with queer issues, trans issues, gender issues in SIGCHI, as with any space, is centering the people who are being affected. This cannot be a useful forum if it is just going to be question hour for white men that would like to understand how to collect data about trans people better. Hire a consultant for that. That's not what this is for. We need to recenter on actual change, or there's no point to this discussion.
Agree. And I think I'm seeing a lot of people actually agree in the comments here. There's excellent resources that are already being posted in the chat that already exist, that people that I see here have poured so much time, heart, pain into. So yeah. Is there anyone that would like to focus us back in this direction?
Let me take a stab at this, because this is getting towards something that I've been struggling a lot with in the last few years, which is how to balance our responsibilities as the people who are knowledgeable about the issues of marginalized folks around gender against the unrelenting demands for that kind of epistemic labor that come our way in this community. Because I think this is one of those things where, like, I did not want the name change policy to be written by cis people. And so as one of the only trans people in the room, I found myself taking on that work. Not because I was initially an expert in it, but because the policies that affected me and my community needed to be written by people with an insider view rather than an outsider view. And at the same time, it shouldn't always be the responsibility of the vulnerable group to do the educating of the comfortable majority. And so like how do we balance that? Like, what is the strategy available to us to manage our own time, to manage our emotional resources, to manage our capacity to continue to do the other work that we're all committed to doing, that we went into this career to do, and also make certain that we aren't ceding the floor to the comfortable majority to make decisions on our behalf.
Michael Ann, you have your hand up?
I do. So two things I wanted to say to Tess's very good point. The first thing is, just as a stopgap, I think we need to make it policy, not just something we all agree to do, but written policy, that the person who is impacted by the issue the most is in charge of a committee like that. The fact is, the opinions of cis people on trans name changes are irrelevant. They are completely irrelevant because it doesn't affect them. The fact is, Tess should have been in charge of that committee with no question whatsoever, because she actually knows what she's talking about. It is not useful to put people that have no lived experience in charge, because no matter how empathetic you are, and I do thank you all for your empathy, empathy is not lived experience, and it never will be. The second thing we need to work on here is getting a pipeline, building a bench. The fact is, we don't have enough trans people, enough queer people to fill the spots because we don't hire enough trans people, because we don't hire enough queer people. And in HCI specifically, you often have to be either closeted or stealth to get the job, which is, by the way, not diversifying our hiring process. It's only diversifying our hiring process if you can get a job while you are fully out, all right? We need to make these structural changes. And SIGCHI doesn't have control over individual university hiring. They don't. But they do have control over who gets all sorts of benefits in terms of having conferences certain places, in terms of who gets positions in committees and that kind of thing. And we can use SIGCHI's power to deliver a message to individual institutions that if you want to still be a powerful institution in our arena that we control, you need to get your house in order first. We're not interested in you sending a bunch of people to a diversity thing that have no lived experience whatsoever. We are only interested in you sending the people that know what they're talking about. And again, I appreciate the empathy. I appreciate the sympathy, but it is not going to solve our problems.
I think that's 2 mic drops in a row for you at this point. That's, I mean, the simple fact that there is consensus among so many of the brilliant people that are here that have that lived experience shows that, yes, you're absolutely right. Morgan, would you like to?
I tried to raise my hand and I hit the clap emoji, but I still felt like that was probably appropriate. I just wanted to add something, which is in the cases where we have people that are part of the marginalized community who are affected leading things like diversity events, which are meant, I think there needs to be a delineation between things that are meant to be educational and things that are meant to be like worked on, right? So like things that are educational should also be led by the people in those communities who are affected, but I also think that they should be prepared to do that and paid to do that. I can say coming in, I didn't expect to be sitting here trying to provide an educational moment when I was asked to be here. And I don't know if it's very jarring, and it can actually be very, I don't even know if microaggression is the right word, but it is very upsetting. I think a lot of people here are very upset by this. And so when this space is meant to be educational for the majority, I think it needs to be really clear, and those people need to be compensated in some meaningful way for that labor, because it's a lot of emotional labor too, to like field those kinds of questions.
I'd like to actually sort of dovetail from that into something that clarified so much for me over the last few years. And it's something that Kata introduced me to. It's the notion of epistemic exploitation. And rather than educating everybody about it, I'm just going to ask everybody who is in this chat, who is, whether or not you are a member of a marginalized group or an ally, to please look up epistemic exploitation, read the paper, even just read the abstract of it, and understand why people might be upset around being asked to educate the comfortable majority continuously in our lives.
Yeah, and I see Kat has posted a link in the chat there. They also have stated, I tried plausible deniability for 3 years until it didn't work anymore because of a horrible Kai keynote. And I really hate being the first in so many cases because you feel really alone. Emery has added in chat, the problem I worry about with requiring that people leading on gender issues be trans is that it requires people be out. Maybe that's the right call. Sorry, chat was just moving quick there for a second. Maybe that is the right call, I'm not sure, but I worry about requiring people out themselves in order to weigh in on issues. Oliver, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just also wanted to kind of acknowledge the extra time that it takes, for like, if we're thinking about the example of, Tess working so hard on the name change policy, that's time that Tess wasn't able to spend, doing research, writing papers, working on her tenure case, like all of these things that all of us have to do. And like, I know myself, I end up spending kind of way more time on DEI work and work related to gender, often like at my university or in like a lot of different contexts. And, I just want there to be some kind of, I guess, acknowledgement that some people are kind of spending a lot more time on this than others, even though we're also saying, yeah, like the people who are most impacted should be able to be involved and have leadership. But at the same time, the other side of that is that there needs to be some acknowledgement that that is at the cost of other work.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's something we've heard mentioned actually in the other talks as well. And as Morgan mentioned, and many other people have mentioned, that's one of the reasons compensation is so important. Yeah, and avoiding being oppressor-centric rather than liberation-centric in our work ends up being a lot less burdensome. Tess has added in the chat, Emery, I absolutely had this issue before I came out. I had so many thoughts on gender issues that I didn't feel safe expressing. Kata added, time trying to find a way to even apply to institution because I have to provide truthful information, but they only offer binary gender options, none of which cover my legal gender. Michael Ann has added, to be honest, this is the heart of why I see hiring as priority number 1. There needs to be more of us to spread out the work. Morgan has added, I would love for cis people to be involved in improving trans lives, but has to be a level of trust there for the work to be representative and just. I'm seeing a lot of people nodding actually to all of these comments. Yeah. While we still have 15 minutes of recorded time, I'd like to remind everyone that you are welcome to stay around for another half an hour in this chat of unrecorded time for continued discussion and conversation. And Discord will be available at any point after that as well. But maybe in light of actually everything that's being brought up, we've sort of answered in different ways this question of where does the responsibility for change lie and who holds the power to create a more gender and queer inclusive SIGCHI community. Maybe we can shift to how SIGCHI can better support queer and trans members who have intersectional and multiply marginalized identities outside of, say, hiring practices, which have been identified, time and space. I really love this idea of demarcating the educational versus the, what was the other term that you used? Yeah, educational versus maybe the base functional work. But yeah, if anyone would like to offer additional thoughts here on how better support structures can be set up, how power can be transferred more effectively.
So I guess if we're going to talk about multiply marginalized identities, we need to address the fact that for the most part, like I'm a transgender woman, and so I have some vulnerabilities, but I'm white. I'm in a tenure track position. I live and work in North America, which comes with all sorts of geographic privilege. I live in a fairly liberal part of North America, California. And so I am not the ideal person to speak to a lot of the concerns facing trans people of color, facing trans people outside of the global North. Dealing with people who are in more precarious positions, such as contract labor, graduate students, postdoctoral scholars. This is like our community is broad enough that we have people that are marginalized across a wide range of conditions. And so I don't know how many of the folks, we reached out to a number of folks outside of North America for this talk. And unfortunately, I don't know how many of them were able to show up and join us. But I would be interested in hearing from other folks in the room who deal with different vectors of marginalization and intersectional issues.
Guilherme, I believe you have a comment.
Yes, well, first of all, now I fixed my internet issues, and I'd like to apologize for interrupting some minutes ago. I feel like really embarrassed for doing this. I feel really honored to be part of this event with so many people that I admire and respect so much. So I'm really sorry for this. I would like to complement a bit what Professor Teresa mentioned, and I would like to talk a little bit about the reality in Brazil for queer people and gender issues and sexuality issues in general. So Brazil, I don't know if everyone knows, but it's considered the most violent country for queer people in general. And I think before we can talk about how the SIGCHI community can embrace gender non-conforming people or even LGBT people, I think the question is how can the academia in general reach these people in other ways, right? Because most of these people will not have the opportunity to engage in a university, let alone in a computing course, let alone the HCI area. So what other strategies could the community create to reach these people and to allow that, for example, a Black transgender woman thought in the south of Brazil and can be heard, for example, in California? And I don't feel I know the answer for this question, to be honest, but I feel really thankful for Professor Teresa to bringing this up. And I would like to know if any other fellow panelists might have some ideas of how to kind of decolonialize the SIGCHI community and allow people from other regions of the world to have their ideas expressed and acknowledged as well.
Thank you for adding to that. Yeah, I think this does draw our attention to the many people that aren't here and present and able to articulate their experiences, leading us to question why. In the chat, Celine has added very popular comment. It would be really great to figure out how to consider the time taken by individuals from marginalized communities to educate, advocate, write policies, etc., and how to embed recognition of that work in tenure and promotion policies. I would love to see examples of TMP policies that already do this. To follow up on that, I do not think that recognition should take the form of extending the tenure clock, as that just extends the time these individuals work at lower rates of compensation, which is an excellent point.
And not just at lower rates of compensation, but also under greater threat of precarity.
Sandra.
Yeah, I wanted to briefly address that sort of issue of, intersecting identities and marginality, and just also admit something maybe a little bit embarrassing, which is that like I have been in and around SIGCHI for a long time, and I have to tell you, I have no idea what this organization does or is able to do or what the purview is, and I think that makes it really hard to understand where advocacy needs to lie, right? So I mean, thinking about intersectionality, right? Queer women of color, trans women of color, the violence, that we've seen this year in our community of, computer science and HCI researchers happening to women of color is horrendous, but I have no idea. We keep putting out these statement after statement every single month. I'm signing a statement about like, why is this being done to women of color? But I have no idea where to point that attention and that labor and that time to. And I think when you occupy these intersecting identities, it's like constantly being pulled in a million directions of like, where is my voice best used and where is my advocacy best spent? And it's just something that is overwhelming that I just wanted to bring into the space a little bit, because I don't, again, having been in and around SIGCHI forever, I have no idea what the power of this institution even is.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. I wonder actually if Tess, Xiaowen, or Neha would like to touch on that in our last 6 minutes of recording time.
I mean, I feel like I've talked a lot, so I was kind of hoping Xiaowen or Neha would weigh in.
Let me, Xiaowen, maybe you can add if you'd like. Let me try to answer that. I think that's a really great question, because for the longest time, even I had really no clue what SIGCHI was and how it was different from the ACM, and in terms of rules and regulations and policies and such. I would say this, that I think that SIGCHI is probably in a position to do more than it currently does. And I think that there's a lot of work that does need to be done thoughtfully, rigorously, carefully, respectfully to a lot of the communities that make up SIGCHI. In terms of having power over individual institutions and such, maybe that's something to be thought about as to how there can be more dialogue there. But I think that there's a lot even now in terms of, the fact is that we run so many conferences. Conferences are a big part of individual successes and how they go on to, first being a student, a researcher, then becoming faculty. And just looking at the conference structures, which is something we talked about in the last session on infrastructures for equity, how do we make sure that we protect marginalized identities? How do we make sure that we look at people who are on the margins to ensure that they are able to succeed without having all of this extra labor added to their lives. So that's just one small way, but I think that there's a lot in terms of just thinking about participation in conferences, but also simple things like just I can speak from the work that my committee and I have been doing. There's ways to support, we've been talking about compensation a lot. There are ways to support groups doing work in whether they're workshops, whether they're, bringing people from outside the community and having educational initiatives. And even those funding mechanisms are not very well understood or known. So a big part of this is community outreach, communications, like how do we get the message out that these are the things we can do. And I feel like once we're able to fix those fundamental issues of outreach, of communication, we can start building up to see what else do we need to do. But already I will say that there's a lot we could be doing just with the infrastructures we have, but we haven't been successful at it so far. And yes, there's a lot more to be done, but it's also going to take a lot of care, a lot of respect, a lot of just understanding that we don't want to be further marginalizing the people that are already marginalized. So I think there's a lot of brainstorming to be done on that front, but as an organization, I will say that there are certain limitations because it is a child of ACM. And there are policies that it has to adhere to, but there's a lot of room even within those policies and structures to actually look after the interests of the people that make up SIGCHI. And this is sort of a vague answer, and I'm just kind of making it up as I go. I hadn't really thought it through, but maybe this is something that in the blog post that we write, we'll put a little more thought into this as to what can SIGCHI do, what has it been doing, and where are ways to expand in the future. Shawen, is there something you'd like to add to that?
Oh, I just want to kind of reinforce and really echo and really beautiful things and very persuasive things that you said. I tend to look at a lot of these changes or current structures or infrastructure for that matter as not something, well, even policy for that matter, not as something static. I would like to think that a lot of us actually have a lot of room to actually make a difference. Along with Neha, we joined SIGCHI EC as a vice president at large in 2019. I would say this has been a really eye-opening experience. And then also that, along with a lot of people, we have made things different. I'm not saying that we are all the way there, but I kind of like to kind of celebrate multiple futures in progress, so to speak. And then I think a lot of these events, like the equity talks, we had done AMAs in the past. A lot of these kind of community engagement, the right engagement with the community, actually open a lot of our blind spots, and then and also make us confront a lot of these issues in a very honest way. And I really very much, in addition to questioning, where the power lies or things that we had not done perfect ways. I just want to kind of invite everybody to do this with us. And obviously, a lot of the comments about recognition, about making sure that these recognition are built into the tenure promotion process. I also think that it's also very important as a part of the volunteer profile. That we can actually acknowledge and make visible a lot of these efforts moving forward. I think I want to just make sure one last thing to make sure that things need to be done. We need to do things differently. I also would like to invite more people to do this work with us because this is important. It benefits. I think that if we can make change benefit one marginal group, I think will make a difference in a lot of different marginal groups and all of us in the future. So.
Can I just add one quick thing? I know we're running out of time and I know Kale probably wants me to stop talking, but I'm just going to say one thing, which is that this has come up in previous talks. I think we need to not think in terms of if we support this marginal group, we're not going to be able to support this marginal group. And I feel like this sometimes comes up when people say, oh, but we cannot put resources here because we have to put resources in this other place. I honestly think that's not a problem that we're dealing with right now. I think we have to figure out creative ways to support everybody. And I think that we can support everybody. As what Susan just wrote, yeah, that's all. And I think Kale, you can kind of lead us into the to the end and then to the unrecorded part now.
Perfect. Thank you. I'd also, as we end this recording, just like to give a huge thanks to Danielle, Javier, to Neha and Xiaowen for helping organize this entire talk series, Adriana, Vinova, Stacy, Soraya, Teresa, Elena, Miriam, all of you have been immensely helpful in putting these together. So thank you. We'll probably end the recording here and then just continue on in an unrecorded fashion afterward.
I'm going to stop the recording now.
You can.
Oh.